What would you think if I were to tell you outright that aliens exist on our planet, that extraordinary forms of life walk amongst us, and that we don't even know it? You would think that's insane, wouldn't you? What if I told you that while people like you and me toil our lives away merely scraping out an existence, an anomaly among us has been shaping the course of our future and gifting us new technology for decades, all while somewhat unconvincingly posing as a human being?
Yeah, you know who I'm talking about. The man upstairs, all praises be to the Most High. And I'm not talking about who you might think I'm talking about. I am talking about...
We're here with John Carmack. Some of you know who he is, but for those of you who are watching who don't, he's a genius. He's developed 3D engines and technologies and a veritable first-person shooter industry.
It would be a matter of encircling the neck, getting a little bit of leverage here, and then squeezing right there. And at that point, the smart competitors will tap. Just tap when when you don't want to. Just tap. Are you okay? That was the tap part.
In our timeline, John Carmack is 53 years old and was born in Kansas in 1970. He had an early obsession with computers and programming, so much so that when he was 14, he was arrested for breaking into his school by melting the windows with thermite to steal an Apple II computer. This got him sentenced to a juvenile home for a year. Despite this, John was captivated by 1970s-era arcade games, most prominently Pac-Man and Space Invaders. Shortly after dropping out of university to become a freelance programmer, he began working for a magazine called Soft Disk that specialized in its coverage of Apple hardware and software. It was during this time that his earliest work became available through SoftDisk's bi-monthly game subscription service. The first example of these games were Shadowforge and Raid, games that, while lacking in visual fidelity due to hardware limitations of early PCs, carried a depth of story and game immersion that set a standard for more groundbreaking RPGs to come. The early version of id Software was originally called Ideas from the Deep, and their first runaway hit was Commander Keen, an early platformer made in homage to popular console scrollers from the late 80s and 90s. Commander Keen was noteworthy for Carmack's first major technological advancement, adaptive tile refresh, a program made to optimize limited PC hardware by simply drawing the pixels being displayed on screen as it scrolls, rather than drawing the entire screen at load. This advancement allowed PC games to scroll at a speed comparable to dedicated hardware, such as the NES. By virtue of this development, Commander Keen was the result of a failed attempt to broker a deal with Nintendo to port a version of Super Mario Bros. 3 to the PC. After recreating what was at the time a groundbreaking game and effectively reverse engineering the game from the ground up in a weekend, Carmack and fellow id Software alumni Tom Hall pitched their idea to Nintendo of America. Dangerous Dave, in copyright infringement, was the game they based their pitch on, a complete pixel-for-pixel recreation of Mario 3 with one obvious twist. Although impressed, Nintendo declined, and id was left to decide what to do with their groundbreaking idea.
Alarm!
Commander Keen was considered a success among a niche market of very early PC gamers. Bearing in mind, this was during a time when a fully immersive 3D environment that was explorable in-game was unheard of, as hardware was so limited that more generic side-scrollers such as the Commander Keen series were already stretching PCs of that era to their limits. The entire early id team had already seen some financial success from publishing these games for Apogee Software, using the PCs they worked on at SoftDisk to create them without their employer's knowledge. During this period of growth, a unanimous decision was made for the team to quit at SoftDisk and begin publishing their own titles. But one important leap in programming innovation would see the light of day before this took place: raycasting. In March 1991, HoverTank 3D was released for SoftDisk's monthly gaming platform Gamer's Edge. John Carmack adapted a new programming engine for this game, which utilized similar mechanics to early flight simulators. These somewhat primitive interfaces featured wireframe graphics to create an interface for the player to move and engage in combat. While this was adequate for an open-minded gamer with enough patience and a strong sense of disbelief, Carmack saw these as a springboard for more. John had a vision of a 3D game with a true 3D environment, not just green lines forming shapes on a black screen, but a fully realized environment drawn in detail. HoverTank brought pixelated sprites into the 3D realm. Drawn completely on a horizontal plane, your vehicle of choice never leaves the ground, slow rolling your way through what looks like the inside of a haunted Rubik's Cube You find yourself saving humans, blasting mutants into puddles in one shot, and generally enjoying the minimalist art gallery that is the untextured walls. Simple as it may be, Hovertank was a colossal leap forward in gaming, and the glue that held Hovertank together was raycasting. Imagine a brick wall 20 feet ahead of you in the dark. Rather than bear the expense of lighting the entire room, raycasting was ostensibly a flashlight. Lacking the horsepower to render an entire screen on initial load, only the objects in your immediate point of view need to be drawn one at a time. This allows for a much more smooth and concise experience. What adaptive tile refresh did for 2D side-scrollers, raycasting did for what became known as 2.5D shooters or Doom clones, and this technology would be refined further later in the year. Catacomb 3D was released roughly 6 months after Hovertank and proved that this new engine had yet to reach its limits. Still using an undercooked alpha version of what would become the Wolfenstein engine, Catacomb furthered the immersion. Sprites were much better animated, and the game in general seemed to move even faster. It was becoming a theme in Carmack's work to assess the limits of what creation tools he had available and stretch them even further. Softdisk would retain the license to both Catacomb 3D and Hovertank. These titles served to fulfill its contract with Softdisk and free the team to work on the project that would be their first true hit, Wolfenstein 3D.
Mein Leben! Mein Leben! Mein Leben!
While Carmack wasn't always the innovator of the technology that made his games great, he is most certainly responsible for refining said technology to its absolute limits, and in some cases, totally redefining their purpose. Using adaptive tile refresh to make a side-scrolling game on a PC move in a way an NES could. Refining raycasting to utilize only the necessary resources, allowing valuable resources to be redistributed to make a 3D environment more and more detailed. Having a fully texture map environment went from being somewhat unattainable to an industry standard. By the early 90s, John had made a name for himself, and many noteworthy names from PC game development of that era would become collaborators. Its efforts on Catacombs had created a ripple effect, causing many other developers to use new hardware and software advancements to create better and better games. Todd Rapogel and George Broussard of Apogee Games were very familiar with Carmack's work, having commissioned him in the past to release the Commander Keen series, and also enlisting him to assist in the development of the first 2 Duke Nukem titles. By 1990, one of the most ambitious games of the era outside of id's influence was already in development. This game was Ultima Underworld. After viewing a demo of the game, id was impressed. While Carmack's response was to create a similar game that ran faster, it was John Romero who eventually pitched a faster and simpler game, sparing the RPG elements and redundant inventory management in favor of a game with a more arcade feel. Having previously been a fan of the Castle Wolfenstein Apple II game, his vision was a game that realized the basic premise in a 3D space. Sneaking and stealth were out, brute force and speed was in. While Ultima was a great game in its own right, its most significant accomplishment as a game is inspiring the team at id to create a texture map game that operated in a fast and fun way. Wolfenstein is by extension the result of Blue Sky's influence and the development of id's first gaming engine over the creation of 3 games, and as the saying goes, third time's a charm. Wolfenstein 3D was a smash hit, in proportion to the market of PC gamers in 1992. John Romero's idea to make a shooting game based on fighting Nazis was a home run. The game was far from flawless. Using a Super Mario-esque system of 3 lives did not translate well to a game like Wolfenstein. Much of the difficulty derives from the fact that enemies shoot on sight, and damage relies on truly biblical RNG. I've played Wolfenstein 3D, and I can bear testament to the fact that this game would only be viable in 1992, before WASD, and before mouse look was how you moved your gun. But the game was a smash, basically inventing 3D shooters, captivating gamers on both the PC and console market, eventually, and inspiring countless other notable achievements in gaming. That being said, a certain amount of good fortune contributed heavily to this success. A relationship was formed with Bobby Prince, prolific in his own right for his musical prowess and creating some of the best MIDI soundtracks of that time. The audio had a rustic feel, but it hit hard. The music? The gunfire?
Guten Tag.
And the screaming Nazis. Adrian Carmack, no relation, head artist at id, was well known for his hatred of Nintendo-style cutesy game design, and he was in his element drawing digitized corpses and grotesque death animations. Not to mention, John Carmack had integrated the new video graphics adapter into his engine, allowing yet another facelift to the textures and sprites. Hardware was evolving at a rapid pace, and every time it did, Carmack found himself a new mountain to climb. A 386 was still considered a respectable machine at the time, but was far from cutting edge. Wolfenstein was developed on a then revolutionary NeXT workstation worth $11,000. That computer came at the cost of John selling his car. Not that this would be missed for long. Scott Miller of Apogee Games, or Scott's Mystical Head, was completely sold on id's vision and promised them it would be a financial success. And he was right. Wolfenstein created two things en masse: money and controversy. Around a month after uploading the shareware version to BBS boards as something of an advertisement, as was the style at the time, id received their first check for the game totaling $100,000. Word spread fast among the early internet, and soon the press caught up. Gamers loved it. Except maybe the ones who lived in Germany. Banned in the country and demonized for its violence, particularly towards dogs, it was a hot button among public interest groups. Many felt that the game was in poor taste and spattered with Nazi imagery and over-the-top gore simply for the sake of shock value. Money is money, and thanks to an offer to make a follow-up to Wolfenstein named Spear of Destiny, the whole team stood to make a lot more money because of it. With the previous game serving as the base engine for Spear of Destiny, John Carmack was free to further develop new tech and seek out how to best put it to use. He ended up freelancing for another company called Raven Software, who were working on a title called Shadowcaster.